Strange tales, yet mirrors of human life. Hey everyone! Welcome to Encountering Chinese, Strange Tales from Zhai. Today, I'm going to bring you a story called A-xiu. In Haizhou, there was a man named Liu. When he was 15 years old, he went to Zhai County to visit his uncle. On the way, Liu saw a young girl in a grocery store, whose beauty was as radiant as peach blossoms in spring. He couldn't help but develop a fondness for her. Liu, under the pretense of buying a fan, quietly entered the store. He had hoped to strike up a conversation with the girl, but to his surprise, the girl immediately called for her father. When the girl's father appeared, Liu instantly lost interest. He then lowered his offer, pretending to bargain, and ultimately decided not to buy anything, leaving the store. But in his heart, he wasn't ready to give up just yet. When the girl's father walked away, he repeated his previous tactic and returned to the shop. This time, the girl was about to call for her father again, but Liu stopped her, saying, "There's no need to trouble your father. Just name any price, and I'll agree to it." The girl complied and set a price, intentionally making it quite high. Liu, without hesitation, paid the money and hurriedly left. The next day, unable to resist, he returned to the store and repeated his actions. When the girl saw him walk out, she suddenly ran after him, calling, "Come back. What I said earlier wasn't true. The price I gave you was too high." She then kindly returned half of the money. Liu was deeply moved by the girl's honesty and, from then on, whenever her father was absent, he often visited the grocery store, and the two gradually became familiar with each other. One time, the girl asked Liu, "Where do you live?" Liu answered without hesitation, revealing his address, and then asked her surname. The girl smiled faintly and replied, "My surname is Yao." From then on, every time Liu left the store, the girl would carefully wrap the items he bought in paper, licking the paper to seal it. Liu would take the package home, unwilling to open it, afraid of disturbing the marks her tongue had left on the paper. Days passed by, and more than half a month later, Liu actions were finally discovered by a servant at his uncle's house. The servant secretly informed his uncle, who then forced Liu to return home. However, the image of the girl had already been deeply etched in his heart. He carefully hid the handkerchiefs and cosmetics he had bought from the shop in a small bamboo box. When no one was around, he would close the door to his room and repeatedly flip through them, touching the objects and thinking of her, feeling a deep sorrow. The following spring, Liu could no longer bear it. He ran back to Zhai County. As soon as he arrived at his uncle's house, he eagerly rushed to the grocery store, but what greeted him was a tightly closed door. Liu felt a wave of disappointment in his heart, thinking that perhaps the Yao family had just gone out temporarily. However, when he returned the next morning, the door was still tightly shut. Liu asked the neighbor about the Yao family and learned that they were originally from Guangning County. Because business had been poor, they had temporarily returned to their hometown, and no one knew when they would return. A sense of loss overwhelmed him, and he became downcast. After staying at his uncle's house for a few days, he left in a daze and returned home. Liu Zigu's mother, having heard of his situation, arranged for a matchmaker to help him find a marriage partner, but each time he resolutely rejected the proposal. This made his mother both angry and puzzled. A servant secretly told her about Liu Zigu's affairs in Zhai County. His mother became even angrier and kept a strict watch over him, not allowing him to go back to Zhai County. However, Liu Zigu remained listless, refusing to eat or sleep. Eventually, his mother had no choice but to relent. She chose a good date, packed his things, and allowed him to return to Zhai County, entrusting her brother to propose to the Yao girl on his behalf. His uncle, following her request, sent a matchmaker to the Yao family. Soon, the matchmaker returned with bad news, saying, "Miss A-xiu from the Yao family has already been betrothed to a man from Guangming." When Liu Zigu heard this, it was like a thunderclap in a clear sky. He hung his head in despair and returned home. After arriving home, he often cried while holding the small bamboo box filled with miscellaneous goods. As he cried, he thought, if only there were someone else in the world like Miss Yao. One day, a matchmaker came to Liu's house with a proposal, claiming that the daughter of the Huang family from Fuzhou was beautiful. Despite the matchmaker's glowing words, Liu Zigu still did not believe it. He decided to take matters into his own hands and set off to Fuzhou to see for himself. As he entered the west gate of Fuzhou, Liu Zigu unexpectedly saw a household with wooden doors slightly ajar. Standing in the yard was a young woman. Liu Zigu was immediately stunned, as the girl looked almost exactly like A-xiu. He stared intently, and as the girl walked and turned back, entering the house, her gestures and movements were unmistakably those of A-xiu. His heart raced, and an indescribable joy filled him. He quickly rented a place in the eastern part of the neighborhood and inquired around, learning that the family's surname was Li. Liu Zigu could hardly believe that there could be someone so remarkably similar to A-xiu. He stayed in the area for several days but could not find a chance to speak with the Li girl. Every day, he would peer longingly at her house, hoping for another glimpse of her. Several days later, the opportunity finally came. One evening, as the sun was setting, the girl walked out of the door. Liu Zigu's gaze fixed on her, but when the girl saw him, she immediately turned back and began walking toward the house. However, her movements were quite peculiar. She pointed toward the back of the house with her finger and then placed her palm on her forehead before finally returning inside. Liu Zigu was both excited and puzzled. After thinking for a while, he made his way to the back of the house. There, he found a vacant lot overgrown with weeds, with a low wall to the west about shoulder height. Liu Zigu seemed to understand everything. He crouched down in the yellow grass and waited patiently. Sure enough, not long after, a familiar face appeared over the top of the wall. "Has he come?" the woman whispered. Liu Zigu excitedly stood up and answered. He was almost certain that this girl was A-xiu. Overcome with emotions, before he could speak, tears began to flow uncontrollably from his eyes. A-xiu leaned over the wall and took out a handkerchief to wipe away Liu Zigu's tears, constantly whispering comforting words. Liu Zigu choked with emotion and said, "I thought I would never see you again in this lifetime. I never imagined that we would meet here today. But why are you here?" A-xiu replied softly. "The head of the Li family is my cousin, and I am staying here temporarily. Liu Zigu then earnestly pleaded with her to climb over the wall, but A-xiu shook her head and said, "Go back for now. Tonight, arrange for your servants to rest elsewhere, and I will come to find you." Following her instructions, Liu Zigu returned to his house, dismissed the servants, and sat anxiously waiting. Soon after, A-xiu quietly came to his room. She was still dressed simply, just as she had been before. Liu Zigu took her hand, recounting the difficulties he had faced in searching for her, and asked, "I heard you have been promised to someone else. Why have you not yet married him?" A-xiu smiled gently and explained, "That was all a lie. My father disapproved of our families being too far apart, so he has always opposed our marriage. Perhaps it was your uncle who was asked to say those things to make you give up hope." Upon hearing this, Liu Zigu embraced her with tenderness. In the quiet of the night, they blew out the candle and exchanged their deepest feelings. They spoke to each other until around 3 a.m., at which point A-xiu quickly rose and climbed back over the wall. From then on, Liu Zigu completely abandoned his marriage arrangement with the Huang family's daughter. He was wholly immersed in the joy of being reunited with A-xiu. He spent his days lingering around the Li household, forgetting to return home, and for an entire month, he never stepped out of Fuzhou. One night, Liu Zigu's servant got up to feed the horse and noticed that the light in Liu Zigu's room was still on. Curiosity arose, and he quietly approached the room to take a look. To his surprise, he saw A-xiu's figure, which startled him so much that he stepped back a few paces. When morning came, the servant didn't immediately speak to Liu Zigu but instead went out to ask around in the streets, trying to uncover the truth. Upon returning, he casually asked Liu Zigu, "Sir, who was the person you were with in your room last night?" Initially, Liu Zigu didn't want to say much and brushed off the question nonchalantly. The servant, sensing something, quietly reminded him, "Sir, this house was uninhabited before, and it's quite possible that it has become a hiding place for spirits or foxes. Think about it, how could the daughter of the Yao family, A-xiu, have appeared in Fuzhou without reason? You must be careful." Hearing this, Liu Zigu reluctantly explained, "A-xiu is the cousin of the family on the west side, what's there to doubt?" The servant, however, shook his head and said, "Sir, I've investigated. To the east of US, there's an elderly widow, and to the west, there's only a young boy. There aren't any close relatives nearby. I don't think the person you met was human. Also, I've seen A-xiu before. It's been many years, and she couldn't possibly have not changed her clothes. Moreover, her face looked pale, her cheeks thin, and her signature dimples were nowhere to be seen. She was nothing like the lively, charming A-xiu from before." Liu Zigu, upon hearing this, reflected on the details from the past days, feeling a chill run down his spine. Trembling, he asked, "Then, what should we do?" The servant suggested, "If she comes again tonight, let me take a weapon and confront her to see if she is human or a ghost." That night, Liu Zigu held his breath and waited. Soon, A-xiu indeed arrived as promised. As soon as she entered the room, she noticed the strange expression on Liu Zigu's face and said, "I know you have doubts now, but I mean you no harm. I only wanted to fulfill an old promise." Before she could finish speaking, the servant suddenly burst through the door, charging at her with a weapon. The woman called out loudly, "Put down your weapon. Go prepare the wine and food, I need to bid farewell to your master." Upon hearing these words, the servant's weapon seemed to fall from his hands as if controlled by some force, dropping to the floor. Liu Zigu was so frightened that he could barely manage to set up the banquet. The woman sat down, and as they conversed, she casually pointed at Liu Zigu and said, "I know of your feelings for A-xiu, and I had intended to help you, but I didn't expect you to set a trap for me. However, although I am not A-xiu, I believe I am not inferior to her in any way. Take another careful look. Do you notice any difference between me and the A-xiu you knew?" Liu Zigu's hair stood on end, his scalp tingled, and his body went stiff, unable to utter a single word. He was paralyzed with fear. Hearing the town crier outside at around 1 a.m., the woman drained her cup of wine, slowly stood up, and said, "I will take my leave for now. On your wedding night, I will return, and we shall see who is more beautiful, your bride or me." With those words, she turned and vanished without a trace. Liu Zigu firmly believed everything the false A-xiu had said. He immediately rushed to Zhai County. Still angry about his uncle's deception, he chose not to stay at his uncle's house, but instead rented a room near the Yao family's grocery store. He personally sent a matchmaker to propose to A-xiu and prepared a generous dowry. However, A-xiu's mother replied, "My brother-in-law has found a husband for A-xiu in Guangning. My husband has gone to Guangning, but it's uncertain whether the marriage there will happen. We will discuss it when he returns." After hearing this, Liu Zigu felt uneasy, unable to sleep that night, and had no choice but to wait patiently. More than 10 days later, Liu Zigu suddenly heard that war was about to break out in the area. At first, he thought it was just a rumor and didn't pay much attention. But as the news became more urgent, he could no longer sit still. He packed his belongings in the middle of the night, intending to return home. Unfortunately, he encountered the war on his way, and his servant got separated from him in the chaos. Liu Zigu continued alone, but he was captured by patrolling soldiers. The soldiers, seeing him as a frail scholar, didn't guard him closely. This allowed Liu Zigu to steal a horse and escape. When Liu Zigu reached the borders of Haizhou, he saw a young woman with disheveled hair and a weary gait. She was stumbling forward, as though completely exhausted. As Liu Zigu rode past, the woman suddenly called out, "Is that Liu Zigu on horseback?" Liu Zigu stopped his horse, looked closely, and to his astonishment, the woman was none other than A-xiu. Still wary that she might be a fox spirit in disguise, Liu Zigu asked, "Are you really A-xiu?" A-xiu burst into tears and replied, "How can you say such a thing?" Liu Zigu then told her about his previous experiences. After hearing his story, A-xiu said, "I am really A-xiu. That day, my father and I were on our way back from Guangning, but we got separated on the road. Then I was captured by rebels. They made me ride a horse because they thought I was too slow, but I couldn't ride and kept falling off. Later, I met a girl who grabbed my hand and urged me to run faster. She moved so quickly, and we darted through the rebels without anyone chasing us. But I grew too tired, and my shoes kept falling off as I ran. I don't know how long it was before the sounds of hooves and shouting faded away, and the girl let go of my hand. She said, "We must part ways here. Ahead is a smooth road, and there's no need to hurry. The one who loves you will be coming soon, and you can return home with him." Liu Zigu, hearing this, suddenly realized that the girl who had helped A-xiu was actually the false A-xiu. He felt immense gratitude in his heart and then explained to A-xiu why he had stayed in Zhai County. A-xiu explained, "My uncle did arrange a marriage for me, and the man's surname is Fang. But before our families could officially be engaged, the war broke out, and the marriage was called off. Your uncle did not deceive you." Liu Zigu helped A-xiu onto his horse, and together, they rode back home. When they arrived at his house, Liu Zigu was overjoyed to see that his mother was in good health and that their home had not been affected by the war. He led A-xiu inside and shared with his mother all that had happened during their journey. His mother, delighted by the news, personally helped A-xiu with her grooming. After A-xiu was finished, she looked as radiant as ever. Even Liu Zigu's mother couldn't help but clap her hands and exclaim, "No wonder my foolish son has been so deeply smitten with you." That night, Liu's mother made a bed for A-xiu, inviting her to sleep beside her. The next morning, Liu's mother sent someone to Zhai County to deliver a message to the Yao family. A few days later, Mr. and Mrs. Yao arrived with gifts. It turned out that after Mr. Yao had gotten separated from his daughter that day, he had been frantic with worry, but had no choice but to return home. The Yao couple had been anxiously searching for their daughter, but when they heard that she had returned safely and had found a good match, they were overjoyed. The two families discussed a favorable date and held a grand wedding for Liu Zigu and A-xiu. After the wedding, Mr. and Mrs. Yao finally departed. Back in the bridal chamber, Liu Zigu opened the small bamboo box he had treasured for many years. The paper package inside was still sealed. He found one package with some powder leaking from it, and upon opening it, he discovered that it was just a packet of red earth. Liu Zigu found this strange and felt embarrassed, ready to explain. But A-xiu, with a hand over her mouth, laughed and said, "You're really foolish. A few years ago, when you came to my family's store to buy something, I deliberately packed the red earth inside to tease you. But who would have thought, you kept staring at me in that silly way and never bothered to check what I was putting in the package." As the couple laughed, the curtain was suddenly lifted, and a woman entered, smiling. "You two are so happy. Don't you want to thank the matchmaker?" Liu Zigu looked up, and to his surprise, it was the false A-xiu. He immediately called for his mother and other family members to identify her, but no one could tell which was the real A-xiu and which was the fake one. Liu Zigu remembered what his servant had told him, that the fake A-xiu did not have dimples when she smiled, and he quickly recognized her. He bowed deeply to the fake A-xiu to express his gratitude. The fake A-xiu looked into the mirror, saw the clue, and then covered her face, running out and vanishing into the night. Liu Zigu and his wife were deeply grateful to the fake A-xiu, and even set up an altar in their home to honor and offer sacrifices to her. One night, Liu Zigu returned home drunk and found the house dark and empty. Just as he was about to light a lamp, A-xiu walked in. Liu Zigu grabbed her hand and laughed, asking, "Where have you been?" A-xiu lightly laughed and said, With all that alcohol on you, you're almost suffocating me. Are you questioning me? Do you suspect I went to meet someone else? Liu Zigu laughed as well and cupped A-xiu's face, looking at her closely. A-xiu suddenly asked, "Tell me, who is more beautiful, me or that fox lady?" Liu Zigu replied, "Of course, you're more beautiful. But when it comes to appearances, sometimes it's really hard to tell." With that, he closed the door, and the two grew affectionate with each other. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. A-xiu stood up and said with a smile, "You really are someone who only looks at appearances." Liu Zigu, confused, hurried to open the door, only to find that the one outside was also A-xiu. He stood there in shock, realizing that the one inside the room had been the fox lady. Just then, a soft laugh echoed from within the room. The couple bowed repeatedly in the room, asking the fox lady to appear. The fox lady replied, "I don't want to see A-xiu." Liu Zigu then asked, "Why don't you change your appearance?" The fox lady answered, "Because this is how I truly look." When asked further, the fox lady calmly explained, "A-xiu's past life was my real sister, but she passed away when she was very young. Originally, we were both foxes, and we followed our mother to the heavenly palace, where we met the Queen Mother of the West and admired her elegance. After returning to the mortal world, my sister and I deliberately imitated her, hoping to take on her appearance. My sister was always intelligent and learned to resemble her in just a month, while I took 3 months but still couldn't replicate her perfectly. Now, she has been reincarnated as a human. I thought I could surpass my sister, but now, even you, a mere mortal, can't be fooled by me. I envy the bond between you two, so I often come to see you. Since that's the case, I'll leave now." And with that, the room fell silent. From that day on, the fox lady would visit every few days, and whenever the family encountered any trouble, she would always help resolve it. If A-xiu went back to her family's home, the fox lady would stay at Liu's house for a few days. The members of the Liu family, knowing she was a fox lady, were all afraid of her and tried to stay as far away from her as possible. Whenever something was lost in the Liu household, the fox lady would dress in fine clothes, wearing a high tortoiseshell hairpin, and would gather all the servants and maidservants. With a solemn expression, she would say, "Today, I won't pursue this, but I know who stole the item. You have until nightfall to place it at the location I've specified, or tomorrow, you'll have a splitting headache and regret it." The next morning, the lost item would indeed be found at the designated spot. 3 years later, the fox lady gradually stopped appearing. If something was lost at the Liu household, A-xiu would imitate the fox lady's attire and tone, and she could scare the servants and maidservants into returning the stolen goods without hesitation. Alright. Today's tale, A-xiu, concludes here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. Feel free to leave your comments and share with others. See you again in the next issue.